Lando Norris made a remark after Barcelona that many people dismissed as routine paddock talk and quickly ignored, but it carried far more weight than it seemed at first glance, because when he said Ferrari was already the fastest car through the corners and warned that if their engine upgrade delivers in Austria no one will be able to match them, he was not speaking as a Ferrari insider or engineer promoting his own machinery. He was speaking as the reigning world champion driving what is currently the second fastest car on the grid, openly describing a situation where Ferrari could become completely untouchable and doing so publicly after finishing third, which matters because Norris has absolutely no incentive to exaggerate Ferrari's potential threat given that McLaren and Ferrari are direct competitors in both championships. And every bit of credibility he gives to Ferrari's narrative heading into Austria only increases the pressure on his own team, yet he still chose to say it because the data from Barcelona left no room for denial, as Ferrari's qualifying traces showed Hamilton around 4/10 faster than Russell through the corners on a lap where Hamilton was not even pushing fully but instead deliberately managing energy, indicating that the chassis performance was already strong, the upgrades were already functioning as intended, and the only factor preventing Ferrari from sweeping every session across the entire weekend was the engine, which has been their single consistent weakness since the season began, a weakness that was never accidental but intentionally carried as part of a broader design philosophy scheduled to be addressed at this exact stage of the season, making Austria the planned turning point, and Ferrari has now confirmed that their plan goes beyond a simple engine improvement. Because the power deficit they have carried since the Australian Grand Prix was a deliberate trade-off decision rather than a failure, and understanding. That decision explains why the Austria upgrade is far more significant than it appears, as Ferrari's power unit concept revolves around using a steel alloy cylinder head, a choice most manufacturers avoided in favor of lighter aluminium, yet Ferrari selected steel because it can withstand far greater combustion chamber pressures and temperatures than aluminium can handle. Although this advantage comes at a cost since a steel cylinder head creates a heavier and hotter power unit that demands a completely different cooling architecture, which Ferrari addressed by designing the SF26 around a smaller and more compact radiator package, freeing additional bodywork volume that aerodynamicists converted into extra downforce, ultimately producing a car that generates less drag for the same level of downforce because the side pod packaging becomes more efficient than conventional thermal layouts would allow, meaning that the engine which appeared weak on straights throughout the season was partially limited because it operated at significantly higher temperatures than any rival, with intake air entering the intercooler exceeding 100 degrees Celsius compared to the typical 60 to 70 degree range used by conventional systems. And that heat is not a flaw but the direct consequence of a calculated trade where Ferrari sacrificed immediate peak power output to achieve a tighter cooling package, which enabled a cleaner aerodynamic structure, which in turn produced more efficient downforce, ultimately making the SF26 the fastest car through corners on the entire grid, exactly the balance Norris recognized externally when he pointed out that Ferrari's cornering superiority comes from the same cooling compromise that created their power deficit, proving both aspects are directly linked. And importantly, the Austria upgrade does not abandon this philosophy but instead pushes it even further, as the package consists of three key components whose interaction is what makes the upgrade more powerful than the sum of its parts, beginning with the engine specification itself, where Ferrari will introduce their third power unit of the 2026 season at the Red Bull Ring, marking the first unit to include modifications allowed under the ADU framework, with changes focused on refining the combustion chamber and turbocharger internals, including revisions to the compressor vane count and impeller angle while maintaining the same physical footprint to preserve Ferrari's critical packaging advantage, all while improving high RPM airflow delivery, alongside further evolution of the combustion chamber geometry to extract maximum energy from every unit of fuel. The second stage of the process focuses on extracting more usable energy from each combustion cycle rather than simply increasing fuel burn at higher temperatures, and this is where Ferrari's collaboration with Shell becomes critical, as their joint work at the Hamburg Technical Laboratory has produced a revised fuel formulation specifically engineered to match the new combustion environment created by the upgraded engine, allowing the intercooler intake temperature ceiling to rise from just over 100 degrees Celsius to a range between 110 and 115 degrees, with a custom fuel designed to remain stable and efficient under these elevated thermal conditions in ways that conventional fuel blends cannot achieve, enabling more energy to be extracted from each combustion cycle without increasing fuel flow, which is essential under current regulations. While the third component of this upgrade is not a standalone part but the interaction between the first two, because a combustion chamber that operates at higher temperatures requires a fuel chemistry capable of sustaining those conditions, and a fuel that unlocks more energy at those temperatures depends on a combustion chamber that can reliably maintain them, meaning the performance gains are not simply additive but multiply when both systems function together as an integrated unit. which explains why even Ferrari engineers find it difficult to separate how much performance improvement comes from the hardware changes approved under the ADU framework and how much originates from the shell fuel development, since the honest answer is that both elements were designed as a single unified package rather than independent upgrades, making the Austria introduction far more complex than a typical engine update, and this context also reframes Norris's statement after Barcelona, which was not a casual compliment but a precise technical observation from a driver who has spent the entire season analyzing Ferrari's cornering performance through the same data channels used by every team on the grid, reinforcing the idea that Ferrari is already the fastest car through corners and only lacks straight-line performance, something clearly demonstrated in Barcelona qualifying where Hamilton was 0.4 of a second faster than Russell through Sector 2, the most technical section of the Circuit de Catalunya where aerodynamic balance and downforce dominate, and he achieved that margin while deliberately managing hybrid energy by lifting at specific corner entries to store electrical charge for later use. Yet even with that conservative approach, Ferrari still gained time in every corner through the middle sector, only to lose it again on the straight where the Mercedes engine advantage became decisive, as the energy Hamilton conserved was insufficient to defend against the superior straight-line speed, causing the 0.4 advantage built across 11 corners to disappear within roughly 200 meters, ultimately resulting in Russell crossing the line ahead by just 64 thousandths of a second, a gap of 64 milliseconds that effectively defines Ferrari's entire 2026 situation, representing the difference between a car capable of dominating corners and one that cannot retain that advantage on straights, which is why the Austria engine upgrade does not need to eliminate the entire deficit, but only reduce it enough so that the gains achieved in corners are no longer lost before the timing line, with Barcelona data suggesting the total corner advantage sits around 0.4, while the upgrade specifically targets the straight-line portion of that gap, meaning that even closing half of it could fundamentally change qualifying outcomes. And if Ferrari reduces its straight-line loss from 0.4 to around 0.2 at the Red Bull Ring, the competitive equation shifts dramatically. Although much of the current narrative focuses on Hamilton, his potential first win, and the shrinking championship gap now down to 41 points, this perspective risks overlooking another crucial factor in Ferrari's Austria prospects, which is Charles Leclerc's exceptional record at the Red Bull Ring, a circuit where his aggressive and committed corner entry style has historically delivered strong performances, including his 2022 race where he overtook Max Verstappen 3 times in a single event at Spielberg, showcasing exactly the type of driving that the circuit's tight traction-limited layout rewards, and further reinforced by Ferrari's strong race pace there in 2025 when Leclerc described it as the track where the team finally unlocked the car's full potential, highlighting how the Red Bull Ring naturally complements Ferrari's aerodynamic strengths due to its short lap characteristics. The nature of the Red Bull Ring, with its short lap and tight sequences of corners, means that traction-limited sections where aerodynamic downforce plays the biggest role account for a disproportionately large portion of the overall lap time, and Barcelona already confirmed that the SF26's aerodynamic foundation is functioning exactly as intended, although Leclerc has not yet had a clean weekend to fully demonstrate what that performance looks like when both cars execute without interruption. As his Barcelona qualifying ended in the barriers and his race was cut short by a hydraulic failure that Ferrari engineers are still investigating for a possible link to his Monaco retirement, making Austria a critical opportunity because it is a circuit where Leclerc has consistently shown the ability to extract maximum performance under pressure. And if the engine upgrade performs as expected across both cars while he arrives at a track that suits his driving style without the reliability and electronic issues that have compromised his last 2 race weekends, Ferrari's Austria plan shifts from being centered around a single driver into something far more significant for the entire championship fight, a scenario that Norris already identified from the outside using Barcelona data that was available to every team on the grid, reinforcing the point that Ferrari is already dominant in the corners and that the engine remains the final missing piece, with Austria representing the moment. That piece is introduced, as the confirmed plan combines 3 elements simultaneously, including a new engine specification that pushes the combustion philosophy beyond what most rivals considered practical, a custom shell fuel specifically engineered for that higher temperature operating environment, and a chassis that has already proven in Barcelona's extreme heat that it can outperform the championship leaders in both cornering speed and tire management when conditions push every system to its limit, meaning that once the engine upgrade is layered onto that existing aerodynamic platform, the car Norris described as potentially untouchable stops being a theoretical projection and becomes a direct question of whether the upgrade delivers what Ferrari engineers have been promising since before the season even began, while the championship situation heading into Austria is clearly defined, with Antonelli leading Hamilton by 41 points and Mercedes dealing with a battery issue. That has now cost the championship leader valuable points in consecutive races without a confirmed solution. At the same time, Ferrari arrives with the most comprehensive upgrade package seen this season, combining engine, fuel, and a circuit where Leclerc has historically performed at his absolute peak level, and while the phrase bigger than expected can be interpreted subjectively. Norris placing Ferrari in the category of potentially untouchable if the engine delivers is not subjective at all. It is the reigning world champion effectively calculating the performance equation in real time based on the available data and drawing a conclusion that carries significant weight for how the championship battle could evolve.